Beginning this fall series based on what's called the 12 powers, these 12 abilities that we have, these factions, assets, mental, emotional assets we have. I told you a story, and I want to continue this story. I want you to use your imagination. Today we're talking about imagination, the faculty of imagination. I want you to use this imagination to imagine a young man named Pick. He was sitting by a fire millions of years ago, maybe at least hundreds of thousands of years ago. He was sitting there this time with his family. His tribe had gathered around. And as the gathering began, the fire was built up high and there was music playing, drums and sometimes other instruments. There was ritualistic movement, maybe dance or even children just marching to the drums around the fire, whatever it was. There was storytelling. Someone stood up and told a story during this process, during this evening. And then there was a time when all kind of got quiet, when people would stare into the coals or look up into the stars in contemplation. And then there's a moment, perhaps for the individuals there, when the thinking stops. And they were experiencing meditation. Today we started with music, didn't we? Many churches have a processional where the priests come down, priests or their leaders come down the aisle. I used to enter from the back and walk up to the front. That was ritualistic movement. Not exactly the same as the kind of dance that I'm describing for Pick, but it's still movement. And then there's a story. Somebody stands up and does some talking, and then we get quiet and have meditation. What's the difference between our experience and Pick's experience? Nothing. We're human. This is why we do those things. All humans do those things. And if humans do those things, there's a real good chance that we are evolved to do those things. I'm not just talking about religion when I talk about those practices. When a young scientist graduates next spring, the scientist will take part in a processional, won't he? He'll enter, there'll be music. It'll be traditional music. There's a song that goes with this, just like there's a song that goes with every story or every rite of passage. And then somebody will stand up and give a speech and tell stories, and then everything will get quiet for a solemn moment while names are called. And again, there's ritualistic movement across the stage. It's not just religion, it's the human experience that we have to have these things. We want these things. We desire these things, and they come out of the faculty of imagination. A rite of passage symbolizes something. It symbolizes a new chapter taking start and an old chapter of life being in the past. A new way of being versus an old way of being. These are intricate mental processes. There's lots of neurons firing, but it's all to serve the faculty of imagination, because the faculty of imagination enables us to anticipate the future and to remember the past imperfectly. The faculty of imagination does both of those things. It creates symbolism. The faculty of imagination does. It grabs our imagination from the moment we're born. Mom, to a baby, symbolizes food, symbolizes comfort, support, friendship, love, sometimes pain. That's what moms do. That's what dads do. We think symbolically from the very beginning. And imagination, the faculty of imagination, underlies symbolism, if you think about it. My wife and I love to drive on the waterfront here in Tacoma early in the morning. When we have a car available to us, we're trying to go car free. We've been 3 months without a car. That's pretty good. And it looks like that's the direction we're going to go. We love to drive on the waterfront early in the morning. Very often it's foggy in the morning, and the sun has not quite crept up, and there's a low fog over the water, and so we can't always see clearly what we're looking at. So we'll look for the animals that we want to see, and if we think it's a deer, we'll try to get closer and see if it's a deer. One of the animals that we constantly are checking out, getting off the road to go into a parking lot to check out, is the blue heron. Now, very often it turns out to be a seagull because you can't see. But we can imagine it's a heron until we get closer. And then it's our imagination that leads us and that helps us. So sometimes we do get to see a heron. We just love those birds. There was a study recently that scientists have discovered that birds can theorize about what other animals are thinking. They have the faculty of imagination. Now, this work was done on ravens, not on blue herons. But the ravens can actually anticipate what another raven is going to think and then act on, or a person. And I don't understand all the processes, but I just think it's fascinating. Because I can assure you, if the raven has that ability, it evolved to have that ability. If we have that ability, we are evolved to have that ability. The heron itself stays motionless. It just stops. It pretends to be not a bird to the fish. Now the heron may not be doing this consciously. It's just doing it instinctively. But the fish can imagine that it's safe until that neck reaches out and grabs it. Then the fish is a meal. That stillness is a deception. And it's unconscious. If we were a human doing it, we would recognize this is the faculty of imagination. It's playing off. The faculty of imagination is, when it's in balance, it allows us to see danger where it really exists rather than where it doesn't. The faculty of imagination has us sometimes seeing danger where it doesn't exist. I'm talking about fantasy, taking it over into the area of fantasy. But today, danger can mean losing a job or not getting across the street without all your possessions. There are lots of levels of danger. But because we can imagine them, we can take steps to get right, to bring that faculty into right balance. Anxiety is a big topic in psychology today because, for a lot of reasons. Today, anxiety, freewheeling anxiety, is considered to be a disorder. But really, it's trying to save your life. That's all it's doing. That anxiety is a survival mechanism. Anxiety got its evolutionary roots back in the earliest beginnings of human evolution. Humans needed it to survive in the harsh and unpredictable environment that they lived in. But humans are hypersocial animals. So we use it also to survive in those social situations where the danger seems to come from the sibling who's going to get the bigger cookie, or the parent who isn't going to be treating people fairly. Anxiety can just come up for any of those things. Today is considered to be an inexplicable feeling of unease, nervousness, and worry. I'm talking about anxiety. And it is true that we've come too far to be worried about the same conditions as our ancestors, but we still have that tendency to worry. We have that faculty of imagination, and it wants to save our lives. It's trying to save our lives. There's a lot of literature today that connects today's anxiety disorders to some kind of psychological abuse or emotional abuse during childhood. Well, back in the day, every child may have had that by the time they were 2, and it may not have come from parents because the environment was so harsh. That early life stress has a profound effect on the central nervous system, and it can occur in adults who are abused as adults. That anxiety can still linger. This abuse is now discussed as a major factor contributing to anxiety disorders, major depression, PTSD. In fact, it's been established that psychological abuse is more detrimental than physical aggression, and that it leaves a deep scar in the victim's mental health. Now, the reality is that the dangers have changed, but our response is still the same. where that anxiety comes up. Ralph Waldo Emerson once wrote, "Let me never fall into the vulgar mistake of dreaming that I am persecuted whenever I am contradicted." Let me never fall into the vulgar mistake of dreaming, the imagination of dreaming, that I am persecuted whenever I am contradicted. That's the way it can seem when our deepest belief systems are challenged, when someone shows up who simply won't accept our ideas, whatever they are. I have a practice that I've developed this summer. I've had to be outside a lot this summer because we just bought a house and we had to install a fence, we had to install a shed, have a shed built. We had to we're having to clean up. We're having to make everything ready while we have the weather in this new house, so that we'll be ready for winter. And because I've been outside, I've gotten a little brown. I've gotten a little tan. My wife goes out in the sun for 10 minutes and she's red, and she's going to be in pain. I go out in 10 minutes and I just brown. She hates that. But in that experience of being outside all summer, I've developed, as I take my breaks, because I have to take a lot of breaks, I take my breaks in the shade and I look up at the clouds, and I've been enjoying finding people dancing in the clouds, finding dragons in the clouds and other things. Are you familiar with a television show called Star Trek: The Next Generation? It started in about 1989, I believe. Well, in one of the episodes, two characters are gazing into a nebula, the way I gaze into clouds. Their names are Data and Guinan. Guinan is deeply connected to all that is natural, and Data is completely unnatural. He's an android. He's basically a robot. What they're doing, they're looking for images in the nebula, and Guinan's trying to help him see beyond the actual shape to what can be imagined there. And she says, well, now it's a Sumerian coral fish with its fin unfolded. And Data says, I believe what you are seeing is the effect of the fluid dynamic processes inherent in the large-scale motion of rarefied gas. And Guinan says, no. First it was a fish, and now it's a Mentonian sailing ship. And Commander Data says, where? She says, right there. Don't you see the two swirls coming together to form the mast? Data says, I do not see it. It is interesting that people try to find meaningful patterns in things that are essentially random. That's the faculty of imagination. He says, I have noticed that the images they perceive suggest what they are thinking about at that particular moment. And then he says, besides, it's clearly a bunny rabbit. My grandson Xander has some words now. He doesn't have very many words. He's a year and a half. Well, one of the first vocalizations he made that had meaning is uh-oh. Uh-oh. So every time something changes, uh-oh. He's getting himself ready for excitement. He's getting that anxiety up. He's doing the same thing that his child would do that was being prepared to go out into the bush millions of years ago. He's just trying to express what he needs to express and say what he needs to say, but he could say, uh-oh. Well, we were playing out we were out in the yard. We were all doing something out in the yard a couple of weeks ago, and Xander was playing in a bunch of gravel in the gravel driveway, and he fell down. He was running, and he fell on the gravel. He hit the gravel. He hit it pretty hard. I thought it was going to be a big drama. He was crying. His mother picked him up, but he immediately stopped, and he said, oh! And then he was fine. He got to tell his story. It's a one-word story. But once he could imagine that the world understood his pain, he didn't have to dwell in it anymore. Think about that. When someone's telling you their story and you've heard it 42 times. When you're telling your story that you've told 42 times and you still can't get past the pain of it. The ability to relate the story one time and to move on is an essential human ability, and Xander is developing that ability. He could imagine that the world understood his pain. Now, faculty of understanding, the need to be understood, we talked about that last week. All of these faculties work together. He didn't have to cry more. He didn't have to yell more. You may have heard of a movie called Nanook of the North. Have you heard of that movie? Back in the early 1920s, a husband and wife team went way north. They found the indigenous people there. They used the word Eskimo, but they found the indigenous people, and they used those indigenous people. They got their agreement and worked with them to tell an imaginary story. Now, they told an imaginary story, but what it did is it revealed the practices of real people. And the word documentary was first used in a review of that movie. Now, the word documentary, it means something different today, too, because we wouldn't have fictionalized stories in a documentary. But that's what he did. He fictionalized the story about real people. Well, this couple went to the South, did the same thing in the South Seas. They went to a South Seas island in 1926, and they found a group of people. They found a family, and they got their permission. They got them on board to tell this story, to act out what they do every day, and so that he could film it and then put it into a story. The name of that movie was Moana, 1926. Oh yes. This girl is sitting here with flowers in her hair, and if you've ever seen the Disney remake, you can see elements of that. She's wearing a headdress with straw that comes down right here. I wish you could see it and see the same scene in the Disney version. In the Disney version, made in the 2000s, the main character can imagine the benefits of leaving the island to save her people. But the status quo says you have to stay on the island to help your people. That's the only way to help your people. She's the only one who wants to leave the island. Everybody else wants to stay. In one scene, the very mature generation says, "Who needs a new song? This old one's all we need." Every generation replaces its previous generation's music. But Moana goes on a hero's journey, which is the staple of human storytelling. She saves her people, and she develops into the person she wants to be, needs to be, to truly help her people. Those stories are flights of the imagination, but they carry deep meaning for us because they are mythologies. Last summer, I went to New York City for the first time, and I was able to connect with an important piece of my past that had nothing to do with New York City except that I saw it on TV. I went went right by the apartments where John Lennon used to live and where he was shot, and where Yoko Ono still lives, and went right into Central Park to a plaque that's there in his honor. It's on the sidewalk. It's a mural with the words "Imagine." The word "imagine" is called the Imagine mural. It's a reference to that song that we heard at the very beginning. John Lennon created a mythology within every song he wrote. It was a success of the faculty of imagination because all creativity is based in that faculty, in the ability to imagine, the ability to see things better, the ability to see what is possible so that we can then help create that in our world. The faculty of imagination can be seen in the world's literature, including the Bible. You know, in the New Testament, there are 4 different versions of Jesus' life, and they're different each time. What that represents is the evolution of storytelling. There was no history at that time. The word history would have had no meaning. Everyone knew that stories grew. Everyone knew that stories, if they weren't written down, that they were changeable, and they would borrow elements and they would add to their own story. There's a massive fantasy that we can treat that as history because it's just human storytelling. As we seek to develop the faculty of imagination, our first work is to distinguish reality from fantasy. What if we have to be able to use our faculty of imagination even to compare them? Because we have to know for ourselves that some is true and some isn't. Some of the things we imagine about other people is true and some of it is not. Some of the things we hope is true about people, some of it is true, some of it is not. Hope itself may arise from the faculty of imagination. Just the possibility that something exists. It's a spiritual faculty that allows us to lay hold of the possibilities in the world, the field of infinite possibilities, and help bring them into creation. We need to honor the faculty of imagination, and even when it's led us astray. Sometimes our faculty of imagination leads us to believe that this horrible thing is going to happen, that bad thing's going to happen, it is happening, whatever it is. And it's just the imagination trying to save our life. We need to honor that, and then we need to transform it. Let's take a moment for meditation.